Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS, informal conversations with thought leaders of India and the world. Today, our distinguished guest is Mr. C. Padmakumar, the newly elected president of the Trivandrum Management Association, which places him in the middle of the industry and management in Trivandrum. He has had wide experience in the industry and business, and has had large number of positions that he has embellished as a manager, as the CEO and MD of Terimo Penpol, and at the moment he is director of the Kerala Life Sciences Industry Limited. And he has had a very illustrious educational career. He is also a special officer of the Kerala Medical Technology Consortium, and he has received several awards during his career. Recipient of Asia Pacific Entrepreneur Award in 2017 for healthcare industry. He was the chairman of the CII Trivandrum region and industry specialist at Rajiv Gandhi Center of Biotechnology. So that means a lot of responsibilities at a fairly young age, I think. And I'm very happy to have you, Mr. Padmakumar. Welcome to Tea with TPS.
Thank you, sir. I'm very pleased to be here.
Very good. You are known as the illustrious brother of an iconic industrialist, Sri C. Balagopal. Was he your inspiration? Is it his path that you followed in your younger days?
Sir, to tell the truth, he was always an inspiration to me, but not in the sense of that I wanted to follow him. I always thought that his level was much higher, and it's not something that I could aspire to. So I used to sort of admire from a distance. But certainly, most of the things that I have done, when I reflect, I think have been influenced by him, and he was and continues to be an inspiration.
Yes, when people ask my brother, who was also in the foreign service, as to what kind of career he planned, he said, I planned no career. I just followed my brother, who used to send me picture postcards from Tokyo. And I decided that I should join the foreign service. So some of us are fortunate that way. You don't have to go around looking for a profession or to follow an idol or to have a model. I think that way you have been fortunate, because he is really one of the most leading thinkers and intellectuals and industrialists, whatever you may call it, a mentor, now a banker in many ways. So you should be proud of him.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. And about your education, how did you start?
So actually, you could say that my education was mostly by default.
Mm-hmm.
After school, it used to be customary for parents to ask, what would you like to do, engineering or medicine?
Yes.
So I answered medicine because it didn't have mathematics. And though I really didn't want medicine either. So I drifted through pre-degree, then realized it was not for me. And then found the path of least resistance to commerce. And from there, I then went on to do an MBA from the Cochin University.
Right. So it was a kind of straight path in that sense, from commerce to industry and commerce to business management.
That's right.
Okay. And then what was your first assignment?
My first job actually was Penpol. My brother had just set up the company. And that was right after I finished my MBA. So there was hardly any gap between finishing my course and joining the company. I was the third employee in Peninsula Polymers Limited, as it was known in those days.
Right. Well, he had just left the IAS and come back again.
He had just left the IAS and started the company.
All right. And how was that journey? It has been a great success. But what was the secret of it?
So when I reflect on that journey, what I remember was the first few years were extremely difficult in the sense that we lost money. We were struggling against all odds. We did, we don't come from a business family, and there was no real business experience of money to fall back on. And we were in a very high technology field, so there was always something new to learn.
But
And
how was that picked up? How was this blood bag industry picked up at that time? Because of his collaboration with some
there
Japanese.
there was no blood bag industry at the time. My brother pioneered the industry in India, and there were no blood bags used in the country at the time.
Right.
So we actually helped to pioneer the use of blood bags in India.
And you had a monopoly of it at that time and even now. So,
We had a monopoly for a short period of time, after which, as is common in India, a whole lot of companies entered the market. I think without adequate understanding of the technology or the product, and then we saw the prices crash. Things went from bad to worse for all of us. And then finally, the market stabilized. Most of the non-serious players exited, and those of us who remained have continued to do reasonably well.
how about your Japanese collaboration? Was that a secret of its success too?
Oh, absolutely, sir.
The collaboration must have been very beneficial to you in many ways.
Absolutely. Even actually before we had this joint venture with Terumo Corporation of Japan, both my brother and I, for slightly different reasons, were great admirers of the Japanese.
Right.
He, from a more aesthetic point of view, he used to watch their movies and read their books. So I remember hearing him talk about Yasunari Kawabata,
Right.
and the legendary film directors
Yukio Mishima.
Yukio Mishima, exactly, sir. And I, on the other hand, after my business schooling, I found myself seriously interested in management as a science, and I was doing a fair amount of reading about Japanese management techniques in the we're talking about the late 80s. It was just gaining currency in India at the time. And I found them fascinating. So when we had this opportunity to actually work with them, it was a tremendous experience, and it changed the way in which we worked.
Well, this is something fascinating for our viewers because there is a vast difference between Japanese management techniques and ours. And it is based in tradition, it's based in the hierarchical structure of the Japanese society. I say all this because I started my career in Japan back in 1969 and studied Japanese language and lived in areas where only the Japanese lived, etc. So I have some understanding and appreciation of the Japanese management and culture. But what struck me most was the way the boss of the company treated his workers. There is a great difference between how we look at it and how they look at it. I used to live near a family which was a very rich industrial family. And I realized that the relationship between the chief of the company and the workers was something like a family. There is no hire and fire system like in America. It is a kind of escalator system, and everybody patiently waited and got all that is due to them. And that kind of a system was very fascinating to me, though I did not understand the industry of management. Is that what you will consider the most important factor in Japanese management?
So I would say that there are a few factors which are critical to the way in which the Japanese function, especially in business, and we have experienced it, we have benefited from it. One, as you pointed out, is certainly the relationship between management, the owners, and the workers. So fortunately for us, it was not very different from the way in which our company management, and specifically my brother, approached the workers and the relationship with the entire workforce. So that when we actually forge this joint venture, it was not very difficult. Though I have heard from many people that it is very difficult for Indian companies to work with the Japanese. I have met friends who have told me that, how difficult it is. We didn't find it difficult at all. We actually found a meeting of minds. So one, I would certainly say, is the relationship between management and the workers. But a very important factor is, I think, their approach to problems, which is quite unique and very different from the Indian approach. If you see, whether it is in business or in government or in any sphere for that matter, you have a very high intellectual elite in this country. These are people who can be probably better than anybody anywhere in the world. But unfortunately, much of the time, many of these people are out of touch with ground realities. You see this very often even in government and in certainly in industry. Whereas the Japanese always look at what they call gemba. They will not do anything without understanding what is actually happening on the shop floor, if it is a factory, or the front line. If it is, for example, marketing, they will go to the actual customer site, to the shop, and then try to understand what the problem is. Now, this is very different from the way in which the Westerners approach business, where it is all data-based, but then your decision making is only as good as the kind of data that you get. And the richness of the data that you can get from a first-hand experience of going to the spot, I think nobody can substitute that.
Yeah, even when they are using very sophisticated machinery, you will find that on the left hand, they will have a little, wooden thing on which they calculate. They always check whether what the data is showing on the computer is the same as you can find out. So that has something to do with their kind of spiritual mold or the kind of tradition that they have. But I found it fascinating that the hierarchical structure, which is rigid, also is very helpful in organizing institutions. Is that really true?
Yes, I think so, because while much is made of having flat organizations and very informal kind of relationships, which is basically the American model, I have experienced both. And first the Japanese, and then actually Terumo bought an American company. Mm-hmm. And that company took over the business vertical in which we are, transfusion. So the Japanese did a very unusual thing in handing over the reins of management for transfusion business to the Americans across the globe. So we came under them. And so we got to experience American style of management also. And I found actually that the Japanese system, with their hierarchy, with their consensus-based decision-making, which is often criticized. And I think it is criticized by people who probably don't understand and have not experienced it. It is actually very powerful, because what they believe in is spending a lot of time at the planning stage. And if you get everybody on board, then the execution is very, very quick.
And the training is very intensive, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that is a huge contrast, I think, between Japan and India, for example. The emphasis and the importance given to training. I feel that this is a huge gap that we have in our country.
Well, I have heard the story that one of the famous Japanese industrialists was asked, see, you are employing these people and training them very intensely, spending a lot of money, and they leave sometimes. And isn't that a loss for you? Then you know what he said? Well, if I don't train them and they stay, it will be much worse, he said.
Yes, exactly.
So it didn't matter that they left. But the important thing was, as long as they stayed with them. Of course, leaving is not very common in Japanese system. But they have this discipline to understand the structure, and then they do the training or do their programs accordingly without thinking of the kind of eventualities that Indian industry or American industry may face. But were you in your company in Pen Paul, did you adopt any particular Japanese looking measures for people to see?
Oh, absolutely. So we actually tried almost everything, of the Japanese.
Even they getting up at 11 o'clock and taking an exercise, everybody together, such
No,
thing. That's
we
not
didn't do that. We didn't do that. We adopted many of the management tools and techniques. Some we were able to actually imbibe in and internalize and actually sustain. Some we tried, but we didn't really succeed. I'll give you a couple of examples. 5S, for example, the famous thing about sorting and cleaning and keeping your house in order was something we took very seriously. And the difference in our factory before and after was something to be seen. It was the same factory. It didn't involve spending any money. There was no capital expenditure. There was no revenue expenditure, but you had a much better, more productive factory.
because of the practices adopted.
Exactly, sir. And secondly, the use of what they call VCS or visual control systems. They are great believers in the power of pictures. And so anything, even if you are tracking production or defects or quality complaints, will be reduced to a graph. And you can, anybody, for instance, even somebody who's not very highly educated, can very easily understand the picture. So they believe in the power of, and that we adopted scrupulously and very widely and to our enormous benefit. We did try practices like just in time, but I'm afraid not with too much success because that also involves a supply chain. And if your and our supply chains stretch across continents, so it was not that simple to, get your product just or your component or raw material just when you wanted it. We ended up still having to maintain inventory. So that was not a great success. But we also tried things like Hijunka or production leveling, then waste elimination. That was a very big thing that we identified, and I think that's one of the most important things that Japanese industry has taught the rest of the world. The fact that you are wasting so many resources in your day-to-day endeavors by just not thinking and by not looking. So the different wastes, of course, are things like excess inventory, overproduction, taking too much time, waiting in queues, and all of these, by the application of some effort, you can drastically curtail, again, without any investment.
But these practices must have been adopted in other Japanese collaboration companies in India like Suzuki
Yes.
and Maruti Suzuki and so on.
Absolutely. So, in fact, in places like Maruti Suzuki and TPS Suzuki, etc., they're far more advanced and much higher level than us. And there's a reason for that. The automobile industry as a manufacturing industry is far superior to the medical device industry. Our quality is good, but let us say, the level of sophistication of manufacturing is much higher in automobiles. So I had the good fortune to visit the TPS Suzuki plant in Hosur. And we thought our factory was good. This was after the Japanese had come also. But I was really taken aback and completely overwhelmed. It was an amazing factory.
Right. And what is the status of Pen Paul now? I was under the impression till the other day that you were still chairman and CEO of Pen Paul. But now who runs it?
No, sir. Actually, I retired in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother had, of course, retired much earlier in 2011.
Yes.
So right now it is managed by Mr. Chetan Makam, who is the managing director. He's based in Denver in the US. And Yeah. So he is the managing director. We have senior level people who manage the factory and the commercial operations, both located in India. So
And
they
you,
report to him.
you still have financial stakes in it, both of you.
No, we don't. We sold our stake completely.
Oh, I see. Mhm. But why? That you had difficulties running it, or the business was not growing? Or? Because you
No,
say state is a leader in blood bag market. That
yes.
would give it up.
So let's just say that I think both my brother and I, um, we had invested a fair amount of time, in our lives into this company, and the company was doing well, doing actually very well by the time we decided to exit. And we had plans of our own. So there were things that we wanted to do which did not, involve just continuing this on the same path that we had followed for 30 years till then.
But he's more in philanthropy and banking and everything else.
That's
So
right.
we also have diverted from there. But I was not aware that this has completely changed hands from you. I didn't realize there's lack of knowledge of industrial secrets as far as I'm concerned. And now, what is this life science park which you are
So,
heading?
yeah, the Life Sciences Park is coming up on the outskirts of Trivandrum in Tonakel.
Yes, I've seen the board.
Right. And this is actually a combination of biotechnology, pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, and medical device companies, all of which it can be in one location. So this is about 250 acres. And in the middle of the Life Sciences Park, there is a medical devices park, which is being set up by KSIDC and Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute for Medical Sciences and Technology. It's a joint venture between them. And that
So
will be a.
it was put up by the government like the Techno Park, was it?
Yes, this is put up by the government of Kerala.
Okay.
And
And then you take places inside that. Or you are in charge of the whole life science park.
no. So I'm on the board of the Life Sciences Park as a government nominee.
Okay. So it's a government institution.
It is a government institution.
Oh, I see. I thought it was still private. And what do they do?
So
Medical and pharmaceutical things.
the first organizations which have come up, one is the Institute of Advanced Virology, set up by the government of Kerala, which is one of the most advanced institutions globally in the field of.
This one is recently put up with Dr. M.V. Pillai and all that. Is that the one?
That's correct. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And
this compound.
And the Kerala Veterinary and Animal Sciences University, they have their research center also within the park. So the park is designed in such a way that you can have research organizations, manufacturing companies, startups, incubators, all of them within the same area. And I can speak for medical devices. My knowledge is not so good about the other life sciences companies, but I understand that they have similar challenges. One of the biggest problems in medical devices is the very high initial investment. So for a startup to be able to afford the kind of instruments and equipment needed for testing and validation is extremely difficult. So if the government provides these kind of facilities, you just have to pay for using them. And that brings down your cost and you have access to the best equipment and instruments.
So how does it work? Working with the government, are you happy with it? Or you think private sector is more effective?
So this is a long-running debate actually that I've been having with my brother. As you know, he came from the government and then entered the private sector.
Right.
And he used to tell us when in the course of our work that, and he would say, "You guys in the private sector," though he was already by then in the private sector, you think that government is very inefficient and that the private sector. He says it's not true, and he would cite examples of the government. So, not having experience of it, but knowing my brother, I used to listen carefully to what he was saying and just file it away. But I had seen and heard a lot of accounts of government inefficiency and so on. But I've now been working with the government for the last 4 months. And I must say that the experience has been so far very good. And I have been amazed at the quality of people within the government. Very, very high, and certainly superior to most of what I've seen in the private sector.
Then how come the public sector has not been very successful in India, particularly in Kerala, if this is the situation?
I think, sir, has to do with the management of those organizations more than anything else.
No, I know. So if the management is wrong, then nothing can be right.
Yes.
So that's, but there are many public sector undertakings who do well. And that is where, of course, the government has a stake. It may not be necessarily based on profit making, etc. And those kinds of industries, yes, they are vital for the nation's development. But public sector undertakings which go into consumer industry or even airlines and so on, you find great deficiencies and problems. And often the solution is privatization, which the new government has been pursuing for a long time. So is that the solution?
So I think that has to be done with a certain sense of discrimination. I believe there are certain things that the government is most suited to. There are many things the government is not suited for. And certainly running airlines and hotels, etc., is not the job of the government. So I think that should be well left to the private sector.
Yeah, the government has no business to be in business, they say.
Exactly. So I believe in that. But if you look at, for example, anything to do with our social well-being, the social sector, basic health, education, or even investment in science and technology, only the government will do this, or only the government can do this. So there is a much, what shall I say, a very wrong notion about the mecca of free enterprise, the United States, that it is all the largest of these captains of industry and private enterprise, which is very far from the truth. Every single big giant organization that you see there, which is flourishing, is based on the United States government's investments in organizations like DARPA and ARPA. And over decades, those investments have taken place. So I think one area which is close to my heart, where I believe the government has a very definite role to play, is in encouraging scientific development, science and technology initiatives, and anything to do with progress, which depends on technology.
All right. Coming to the TMA, you have been in the TMA for many years, I'm sure.
Yes, sir.
How has it helped industry business in Trivandrum and Kerala, the Management Association? Obviously, everyone involved in the industry or business is a member there, right?
That's right.
Naturally, there is a lot of possibility of strategizing, planning, innovation, etc., etc. So, how much has the TMA been able to do? Or is it basically a networking organization?
So I think if I look back, the organization was founded in 1985. And my brother was one of the founding members, along with the then HLL chairman, Dr. Namburi and others. So I had just joined the company right after my MBA. So I sort of saw it from the beginning. And so there was nothing. And then slowly this organization formed. And we used to meet in rented premises, wherever people would offer TMA space. From there, now it has grown to a reasonably large organization. We have 300 members. We have more than 30 corporate members based in Trivandrum. And I think what the TMA has accomplished is to make management as a profession visible and, I would also say, attractive in the city of Trivandrum and its surrounding areas. Because I remember when I started, I didn't even know what an MBA was when I was doing my commerce. Nobody knew what it was at that time. So, and we are talking about the 82, 84 period. So Kerala, it was a completely unknown thing. And from there, when we look now at the number of students who are going in for the MBA and the number of business schools that have been set up in Kerala, I think that's that's good going. And I think TMA has played a role, one in advancing management as a desirable profession, and two, I think also in highlighting some of the key issues relating to the development of Trivandrum and Kerala in general.
No, but you must be in competition with each other in several areas. How do you deal with that?
So in competition with?
No, the different companies, you may have different or similar profit, similar output, and then naturally there could be competition. Do you try to resolve them or try to make it easier for people to interact? Is that one of your objectives?
The chief objectives of the TMA are actually it's the local management association located here and a part of the All India Management Association. So just like the IMA's objectives, the spread of management as a profession is the major objective. So this is done by encouraging companies and business people to join and also students to join. So networking is a very important part of our activity. And competitor, for example, HLL and us, Penpol, we were competitors right throughout.
Right.
But, we ended up forming this organization itself together. And we had a very good relationship right throughout. In fact, we used to exchange.
For the purpose of cooperation and collaboration, etc. also.
Absolutely.
So how are you planning to take this forward now that you are the president?
So what we did a few years back when Mr. Rajesh Jha was president, so he is actually the immediate past president. He's been the president for little over 2 years because of COVID.
It's the Adani man, right?
He's the Adani man. So Mr. Jha and I was part of his team, and the other members of the managing committee, we had a discussion and we were thinking about how can we get people to see something of common interest to them. So it actually started with a problem that I had because I had just been appointed to the board of the Kerala Life Sciences Parks. And in the board meeting, the discussion was about how do we market the park. And in almost the same breath, the then managing director of KSIDC and the Life Science Park said that we don't have much of a budget. So, I mean, marketing does need budgets. So when I went back after the meeting and I was reflecting on it, then I thought to myself, actually, this is not a problem of the Life Sciences Park. This is a problem of any business in Trivandrum. And there are some big businesses here. So you have, first and foremost, the Virinjam Adani port. Then you have companies like HLL and Terumo, Penpol, IBS, the big UST, Global, etc., the big IT companies. And you have major institutions, research institutions like Chitra, Sri Chitra, and so on. So it is in everybody's interest that Trivandrum develops. So if we can come together and form a common platform with a common vision, we thought it might help. So we worked with KPMG and with many of the citizens of Trivandrum. We relied a lot on the kind of work done by Mr. Vijayaraghavan, who did an incredible exercise of working with 10,000 citizens in Trivandrum to come up with projects for the development of the city. So based on all this, KPMG helped us to come up with a Vision 2025. And that was adopted in 2020. And we are sticking to that now. And as president, sir, I would like to just ensure that we stick to that till 2025 and do what is within our power.
And also plan for the future. You have to go look beyond.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is this is the sort of foundation. And this year, what we are thinking of is taking one element out of that vision, a very important element in our opinion, but also one which is neglected and most people don't want to touch it, which is waste management. And so the TMA would like to focus on just that aspect, because I think other things like infrastructure, etc., there are more capable organizations and much better resourced organizations like the government and the Adanis, etc., who can handle it.
Yeah, since you mentioned waste management, that of course is one of the challenges of the city, of the state, of the country, everything. And I heard that now people are moving away from centralized waste disposal and wanting all these to be done at the source. Is it effective? Because in most cities that I have stayed in, it's all centralized and they work very effectively. In fact, the most beautiful part of the city of Vienna is its waste disposal plant. Rather than you will think that this is the most desirable place you have to be in. But think of any waste disposal plant in India or particularly in Kerala, go to Kochi, go to wherever you go. It is the source of all evil. So
right.
how are you going to reconcile with this? How are you going to think of these waste disposal at source, saying with this massive arrangements which seem to take care of the requirements of a very highly sophisticated culture?
So our approach is as follows. We don't know the answer. We know the problem. But TMA also has very fine brains within its community, among our members itself. We also have some of the best organizations in the city who are our members. There are a few who are not our members, and we would like to include all of them, pick their brains, and come up with solutions. So I agree with you. I think a completely decentralized approach may not work, not in a large city. If it's a small town, it may be possible, but I think Trivandrum has now grown beyond that limit, and there has to be some form of centralized waste management. So I'm hoping that we will operate as a facilitator and bring together the best brains and then try and solve the problem.
Yes, many companies have come here. I myself brought a company from Austria to look at this at a personal level and all that. But they all go back frustrated because they say everybody is very enthusiastic initially, but when we go to the brass tacks, things do not work. And this has been my very limited experience, one or two cases. Then how are you going to resolve it? Because you need foreign technology, you need investment. And if the government is not able to cope with the demands of this kind of an industry, it'll be very difficult. So is there any future for it in your view?
Yes, sir, I think so. This is my sort of pet project, and it's based on my experience. If you asked me, if there was one factor over all others which accounts for the success of Terumo Penpol, there are many factors actually, but if I had to pick just one, I would say it is our ability to work at Gemba, like the Japanese say. So work on the shop floor, work where the action is. And that's what is actually missing in our society and in this country. So my thinking is that the agencies, if the waste management has to work, it is the local bodies which have to actually implement it. So that means the Corporation of Trivandrum and the Panchayats in Trivandrum district. So we, TMA, plan to work with them and work at the operating level, not just at, let's say, the 20,000, 30,000 foot high view at the board level, but where the people who are actually going to do the work, we hope to be able to do. Our thoughts are just being crystallized, but that's the general direction in which we are thinking. And I believe that is the solutions. There is no getting around it, no matter what technology you come up with. And why I think it is possible is because Kerala has shown whenever there is a crisis, and especially it has shown so well in the healthcare sector, that it is the people on the front line, it is the ASHA workers, it is the Kudambashri people, it is always these people who deliver. So we have the capacity to do that, but for some reason we don't do it all the time and we don't do it in every sphere.
So, what are the reasons? Is it corruption? Is it a lack of discipline, or is it a lack of policy decisions? What is it that is stopping us from, doing our best?
So, my
Malayalis are do very well abroad.
my guess is that it is a combination of these causes that you mentioned, sir. But this is just a personal bias. I have always believed that if there is a problem, then most likely, and this is not just my opinion, this is also the basis of modern Japanese management thinking. The problem is always at the top. I read a very interesting book. So when I was first made a director of the company, which was after about, I'd been working by then for close to 20 years. And I realized that there was no training for directors.
Nice.
And so you were just expected to, assimilate or absorb this and become a director. So I did what I always do. I found a book, and it was an excellent book entitled "The Fish Rots from the Head," and it explained very clearly what is the role of the board of directors, and that impressed me very much. And when I look back on my experience, whether it is in my own company or in other companies or other organizations, I feel that it is very true that most of the problems actually emanate from the top. It is either something missing, something which is an act of omission or an act of commission. And
No,
what
when you
to
go in a company for 20 years, don't you presume that you assimilate all this and acquire these qualities? Isn't that the logic of someone becoming a director from a position of management?
Yes, sir. But the problem is that the director's job is very different from what you've been doing. You're not trained to do the director's job. You are trained to do a manager's job. And you know how to do that very well. Now you have to completely change your perspective. And that nobody's trained. So this is nothing unique to India. I realized when I read this book that the author was a British author. He was saying this is a global problem. Of course, probably more accentuated in India because I think by and large we don't believe in training.
As Rajiv Gandhi started a culture of training, and that upset a lot of things. There were not people available to work. Everybody was on training. Ambassadors were called away to Delhi, and everybody was complaining that we are not attending to the problems we have back in the missions. But he said, no, you will stay here 2 months, and I insist on it. And it had some benefits, definitely. Though we all felt that who are we? How can we be trained at this stage? But he did insist on that. I had Ambassador KPS Menon sitting on my right. He was already retiring the next few months, and he was being trained. So that can also be quite ridiculous. So that, of course, is a matter of judgment as to what kind of training should be given at what level. But in many institutions, like in the civil service, you shift from one place to the other, one job to the other, without thinking of any kind of training midstream. Maybe in the army has it and some other services have it, but civil service it doesn't have it. Today you are director of agriculture, tomorrow you are director of statistics. So it's a kind of generalized approach, generalist approach that anybody can handle everything provided you have the right brain and right. So that is not the philosophy of today. Today you need training. But aren't you also moving away in the industry and commerce away from degrees and training programs, etc.? Because if you have one good idea and a computer, you can become a millionaire. That is the situation today. So your MBA does not matter. Has this happened worldwide?
So I think it's a little early to say whether that is become a trend. There is certainly we hear of enough stories and anecdotes and case studies.
The story of startups, for example.
Exactly. But so I think the emphasis that we in India give to degrees is far too much.
Right.
And what we really need, if we want to be, for example, a manufacturing nation, we should take the example of either Japan or Germany. The way in which they approach work, they approach manufacturing, and most importantly, how they approach training. And so, one of the most important, what shall I say, lessons that I learned about training was, and as I said, was heavily influenced by the Japanese. So I assumed that whatever I was reading is all come from Japan.
Right.
Until I found the source of all this Japanese management magic. So it is generally acknowledged by the Japanese themselves and globally that Professors Edwards Deming and Joseph Juran were the people who gave them the quality movement. What is not so well known, sir, is almost everything that you call Japanese management today emanated from the United States Navy.
I see.
They had a program, the US government had something called training within industry. And it is worth reading that manual which they've come up with. It is incredible. The United States government in the Second World War, because they had no able-bodied young men left, they were all at war. They had to bring in women and old men and children to work in the factories. So how they trained them and made them into global manufacturing power, that is the story of this TWI.
So after the Second World War.
Yes, and the Japanese, being very intelligent and practical people, just adopted what the Americans didn't want after the war.
Well, they adopted the Americans themselves. Their worst enemy became their master. So
That's right.
that kind of practicality is unbelievable. Even now we fret and fume about the British, don't we? So they didn't do that. They just adopted them. The MacArthur was supported for the presidency by the Japanese people.
Yes.
There cannot be a better adjustment of realities like that they are capable of. That I'm sure. But the general trend today is that a good idea is much more important than a good degree. You
Yes.
can be a dropout, you can do this, that, and the other, but you cannot obviously generalize it. In a country like India, where we have jobs of shortages, how do you judge somebody's performance unless he has a degree?
That's right.
But then the engineering education has shown that we are not on the right track, because in a developing country to have surplus of engineers is a contradiction in terms, because these engineers are unable to deal with things, use their hands. And that was, now we are moving away from that. That is why engineers of a lower educational quality like IITs, not IITs,
ITIs.
ITIs, for example, are in greater demand than qualified engineers. And the higher ones who go to IITs, they go abroad anyway. So that is why we are not able to get the right kind of people. Is that your perspective too?
Oh, absolutely, sir. I remember in the last TRIMA convention, which we at TMA host, surprisingly, a scientist came up with this, very interesting insight. Dr. Chandrabas Narayana of RGCB.
Yes.
He was talking about manufacturing in India.
Is the Raman effect, man? No?
Yes, and he mentioned something which made a lot of sense to me. He said the problem of India is that we focus on the IITs and not on the ITIs.
Right.
Whereas Germany and Japan and all that, they focus on both. I mean, the vocational training and the people who actually do the work are very, very critical. But we don't seem to recognize that. So we do not invest in their training. We pay them very badly. And generally, they are a neglected lot. And as you said, a good lot of the IITs go abroad. Those who remain, I think, remain in their air-conditioned, cabins and are blissfully out of touch with reality.
Exactly. So, in fact, we have to, the engineering program, to make them work and they're able to use and make them employable, you have to bring down the level of theoretical experience that they gain in the engineering colleges, because that is not valued today in the industry. Isn't that true? Because they would prefer a person who is a lower level of education but skills. That is how we have a lot of emphasis now on skills and internships and etc. But are they picked up? Are they sufficient for the industry? I don't know.
Not yet, sir, because and I would lay a lot of the blame on industry than on anybody else, because we are not willing to invest in things like training.
No, in fact, this is what I tried to do when I was in education. In the United States, for example, the industry pays for the students' education. The industry tells the university, we want such degree holders, and then they pay for it.
Yes.
Here they come and pick up their best and say they are doing a great favor, campus improvement.
Yes, yes.
They don't put their money where their mouths are.
Exactly, sir. I agree with you.
So that is where we tried. But of course, in Kerala, there is enough industries to support an education system. So it didn't work here. Because software business, etc. This is not so acute. But in bigger industries, it's very important for you to have people who knows the on the job training program. And for that kind of investment, the universities have no money or no facilities. And so industry, academics, collaboration is something which I tried very hard for, but didn't succeed, I must say. So that I think that growth should be industry and education have to somehow work together to have the right kind of training for the right kind of people for the right kind of jobs. And that will be an ideal situation. Right.
That's right.
Okay. So, well, it's very nice talking to you. And you have just become the president of the TMA, and therefore a lot of expectations of you, I suppose, from your colleagues. And from what I have heard from you, I'm absolutely certain that you will rise to the occasion. Thank you very much for spending some time with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It's been a pleasure.